Macromolecules by Lindsay Larimore. To begin this presentation, we must know what exactly are macromolecules. Well, we must break down the word to know what it means. So let's start off with the word macro. And macro means large. So instead of macromolecule, it is a large molecule. Macromolecules are very important in our lives. They help us with our bodily functions. They help plants with theirs. They can even help our animals with theirs. Macromolecules are divided into 4 different classes for different reasons to be able to help us in our lives. One of them is carbs, or also what we call carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. All of these macromolecules have one thing in common. So, what are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids all have in common? Well, it's just one simple word. They all have a monomer. So you might be thinking, what exactly is a monomer? Well, monomers are just small subunits that join together to become one giant macromolecule. We may even sometimes call this a polymer. Since we know that each of our macromolecules have at least one monomer, let us find out which macromolecule has monosaccharides as their monomer. To be able to find out what macromolecule goes to our monomer, we first need to break down our word. So we need to start off with the prefix mono. So when we look this up, we find that the Greek root mono means one. And when we look up saccharides, we find that it means sugar. So we must think back to the functions of each of our macromolecules to find out which one needs sugar. The function that is the closest we can find for monosaccharides is to provide energy. And this one is for a short amount of time, about 24 hours. And there's only one macromolecule that fits this, and that is carbohydrates. Let's look more into carbohydrates to know exactly what they are. The reason this macromolecule is able to do all these things for our bodies is because of the elements that it uses. The elements that it uses are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And carbohydrates changes all of this stuff, or these elements, into energy that we need for our bodies. Some examples that you can find are bread, which is full of the most carbohydrates, corn, and beans. What bread, corn, and beans also all have in common is that they are very high in content of starch, which is why they're carbohydrates. The usual result from starch is a polysaccharide named glycogen. Glycogen helps animals in their short-term energy, and it helps in their liver and in their muscles. And what else helps plants is something called cellulose. And plants use the chains of glucose molecules to form the cellulose. And what cellulose is, it just helps with the plant walls. And most animals cannot break down cellulose, which we also can't do it either. And we usually call this fiber. We usually need, if we ever do eat this, we usually depend on other parts of our body to help us with this. So, what does a carbohydrate, also known as a polysaccharide, look like? So what we see here is a glucose molecule. And I bet you're wondering, how can we have a molecule without elements? Well, we do have elements here, but we can't see them because sometimes scientists don't put them on there because sometimes there's a lot of them and it's just easier just to draw the picture. So let's go over what exactly and where exactly are our elements. Well, when you see these brackets here, that means that there is carbon. And usually, when you see carbon, it is connected to 4 other elements. And we also have our hydrogen that we find here, which is connected to 2 other elements. And we also see our oxygen, which is usually connected to 1. And so, now that we know this, let's go ahead and label our molecule. And so, here we have hydrogen, we have oxygen and hydrogen, we have hydrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen. We have our carbons on the sides. Don't forget about those. We have hydrogen and oxygen at every single one of these points. And here at the top, we have carbon, hydrogen, 2, oxygen, and hydrogen. And then at the bottom, we have hydrogen. So, what happens when we want to combine 2 carbohydrate molecules? Well, if we want to combine our 2 molecules, then we must create a chemical reaction. And to do that, we must take away our H2O, which means we use dehydration synthesis. And when we do this, our molecules are bonded together. And they are bonded together by the glycosidic bond, which creates our new molecule sucrose. So what happens if we want to go back to having two different molecules? Well, to be able to do that, we have to add back our H2O. And when we do that, it is called hydrolysis, which means cutting water. And when we do this, we are able to take away the bond and recreate glucose and fructose. A hydrogen bond is also something that happens during a chemical reaction. And this happens because a hydrogen bond is an attractive force between hydrogen, which is an electronegative from one molecule, and an electronegative from another molecule combined together to create a positive force, or also known as the positive charge. And this can help in many functions. Going back to our handy-dandy functions, let's figure out what macromolecule does this monomer, glycerol and fatty acids, go to? Well, glycerol and fatty acids goes to a macromolecule which stores our energy for later on. And this macromolecule is lipids. We know this because fat is used later on in life when we need it the most. Some other functions that lipids provide are cell membranes for our cells, hormones, which keep our body stable, insulation, which keep us warm, and what helps lipids with these functions are the elements, which are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. This seems familiar. Remember when we were talking about our good friend carbs? It also had the same exact thing. And what carbs did was they stored energy. So that means that these elements help create energy. Some examples of lipids are waxes and fats and trans fats and oils. So what waxes and fats and trans fats have in common is that they are saturated, and oil is unsaturated. On the left of the screen is an example of a saturated fat. And it's a saturated fat because it is solid and has not been broken down by anything. And on the right of the screen is an unsaturated fat. And it's unsaturated because it has been broken down by something and has been taken away of some of its molecules. And this makes some of our fats oils instead of solids. Let us go back to our last two monomers of our 4 classes and find out which macromolecule goes with one of our monomers. And let us look at amino acids. So our monomer amino acids goes to a macromolecule that helps us with our growth. And the only one left out of our two macromolecules that will work for this is proteins. Let us look more into what exactly proteins do for us. So the functions of proteins are to be structural for our cells and body, to help with our enzymes, and to help us when we get sick and help us with our antibodies. So what are our elements that help proteins do these functions? For proteins, we actually have 4 elements instead of 3 like the last two. The 4 elements are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. So let us look at what exactly does a protein molecule look like. This is an example of what a protein molecule looks like. And we can see we have our carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen. So what's this weird little R thing over here? Well, the R groups are just replacements on what any other element that we can put in place of it. These are usually non-polar, polar, acidic, or basic. And this is just a fill-in for if we want any other types of elements here. So what do we do if we want to add 2 molecules together to create one big molecule? Well, we must first do our dehydration synthesis to combine them. And when we do this, we take away 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen, which equals H2O. And this is why it's called dehydration, because we're taking away the water. And when we do that, we create our 1 bond. And for proteins, we call this bond a peptide bond. And that is how you combine 2 molecules together in proteins. These are some examples of proteins that we should eat every day. We have meat and fish, cheese, eggs, beans, bread, hummus, and nuts and seeds. These are things that are very high in protein. Now that we have gone through almost all of our monomers, we have 1 monomer left, and that is nucleotide. And that means we only have 1 macromolecule left. Let's figure out what that macromolecule is. Since we only had 1 monomer left, which was nucleotides, we only have 1 macromolecule left, which was our nucleic acids. So what our nucleic acids do is help with our genetic information, such as RNA and DNA. So how are they able to do this? They are able to produce their functions because they have elements, which they have 4 of them, which are carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, and phosphorus. And this is how they are able to do their functions. So this is an example of a DNA molecule. This first molecule is the phosphate group. The second molecule is sugar. And the third is adenine, which is a nitrogenous base. And all of these work together to become one DNA molecule. This is an example of our RNA molecule. In each of these, so this part is a ribose. Right here is the phosphate, just like we had in the DNA molecule. And here we have our base. Here's an easy way to remember our organic molecules and our macromolecules. We have CHO, CHO, CHON, and CHOMP with an N. And each of these are your carbs, your lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. What each of these are the elements that are found in each of these. We have our carbon, we have our hydrogen, our oxygen, which is in all three of them, or all four of them, our nitrogen, which is in 2, and our phosphorus, which is in 1. This is just a simple way to remember what our organic molecules are. Let's go over it again. CHO, carbs, CHO, lipids, CHON, proteins, CHOMP, nucleic acids. CHO, CHO, CHON, CHOMP. Thank you for watching, and I hope this was helpful for your study in macromolecules. Thank you, and goodbye.